right, welcome in everyone to the 6th episode of the Blake and Jake Show on KCOU 88.1 FM, and I was excited to get in here this week. I am Blake Wallace, your host, joined by my co-host and great friend, Jake Aaron.
Hello, hello.
Today's show, Jake and I break down this week's All-Star Weekend and debut our 5 favorite alternatives for the NBA. Next, Jake and I have dissenting opinions on who are the top 5 quarterbacks in this year's draft. Well, we're going to figure that out. And finally, we wrap up by breaking down UFC Fight Night, Moreno versus Royval 2. I haven't exactly enjoyed talking about the fight so much because they've been pay-per-views, but no longer. This is a fight night, so it will be something that fans or people that are interested are just going to be able to tune in without opening up their wallets too much. You can find the Blake and Jake Show on Spotify and YouTube at the Blake and Jake Show, and on Instagram at the Blake and Jake Show. That will be no spaces there. Jake, go ahead and take it away with the weekly sports news update.
All right, thank you, Blake. On Monday, it was announced that Arizona has hired Desiree Reed-Francois as their new athletic director. She was previously the athletic director, of the University of Missouri. While at Mizzou, she led the athletics department to a $15 million surplus in 2022, which ended a 5-year run of operating athletics at a loss. Mizzou also saw an attendance increases at sporting events, and the athletic department earlier this month received a $62 million gift. She also hired basketball coach Dennis Gates, who led Mizzou to its first NCAA tournament win in 13 years, and hired volleyball coach Don Sullivan, who was named the Southeastern Conference Coach of the Year in 2023. Before Mizzou finds a permanent replacement, they named Marcy Girton as their interim athletic director, who once served as the chief operating officer of athletics at Auburn and at the University of South Carolina.
Yeah, great pickup, but losing Francois after the turnaround in athletics in the last few years. You think about football, but you also think, and maybe not so much on the grand stage, but volleyball. And that was a huge turnaround from where they were just a few years ago. And I still give Francois' era the credit for Dennis Gates and that basketball movement too. And there's still some work to be done. And I think that was a great hire in order to just kind of hold the boat together for right now.
Yeah, we can only hope that whoever is the permanent hire next will do as good of a job as Francois did. Moving on, in college basketball news, Caitlin Clark broke the women's scoring record with a shot from the logo against Michigan on Thursday. She broke Kelsey Plum's record and ended up scoring a career-high 49 points that game in Iowa's 106-89 win. Clark now has 3,569 points and is just 99 points away from passing Pete Maravich's record for the highest number of points scored by a man in college basketball history.
I don't really have anything good to put onto that number because it's so insane. But the way that she broke the record was awesome. I don't know if you were able to see that deep 3-point shot from the logo. Come on, with no hesitation. And really, you wonder, like, how does somebody break a record with a shot that looks like them? Caitlin Clark with absolutely no fear from distance. That's exactly how she should have broken the record. I just love that it was done that way.
Yeah, it was a great shot. A great celebration afterwards. It was just all around. She's been great for not just women's basketball or college basketball, but for the game of basketball in general. Yeah. So moving on, last week the NFL announced that Jimmy Garoppolo will be suspended for 2 games for using performance-enhancing drugs. It's reported that the Raiders plan to cut Garoppolo in March to avoid paying him an $11.25 million roster bonus. Garoppolo ended 2024 with a fully guaranteed salary for $11.25 million and an $11.25 million roster bonus, but the suspension will void both those guarantees. Last season, Garoppolo led the league in interceptions when he was benched in Week 9. Blake, what do you think is the future of Jimmy Garoppolo?
I'm glad you asked that. I think Jimmy Garoppolo, none of that money that was voided is a super serious issue. He's going to be able to find that money elsewhere, and I think it's going to put him in a very lucrative spot next year where you think he's got to be out for 2 games. But if any team wants to pick him up, either as, hey, our quarterback, maybe it's an Aaron Rodgers situation. Think about week 1 of the NFL this year. Aaron Rodgers, first snap, kind of runs out, little injury, and suddenly it's Zach Wilson all over again, and seemingly a worse spot than Zach Wilson has ever been because, had been prepared to be the starter and it had not succeeded, yet then you kind of throw him in as a starter when he was supposed to be the backup. It was supposed to be a learning time for Zach Wilson. Think of just how valuable a player like Jimmy Garoppolo would have been to the Jets, who believed they had playoff hopes throughout the season, even sometimes with Zach Wilson, though that might have been a little bit strangely founded. So I don't think it's a bad spot for Jimmy Garoppolo, but a good spot for the Raiders, too, able to void out that money and get working on it, because simply put, it's a long road between competing in that AFC West with the Broncos, with the Chargers, and of course, two-time Super Bowl champions, back-to-back Super Bowl champions, the Kansas City Chiefs. And so I think it's kind of a win-win for both, because I don't feel like there was a marriage there that was going to last anyway. So both kind of get to move on, and it does open up opportunities for both.
Yeah, and I think that'll do it with the weekly sports update. All right, so now we're going to go into our first topic. Blake, what are your thoughts on the 2024 All-Star Weekend?
The NBA All-Star Weekend. It was another weekend, another boring All-Star game, more dunks and threes, and absolutely no effort. The most interesting topic for the last decade, more so in the last 5 years, is how do we fix the All-Star game? Now, I've heard a lot of suggestions. I've heard USA versus World, and maybe that caught a little bit of spirit within me, but the NBA just simply isn't going to do it. And if the NBA does it, I don't see it actually improving the game that much, and I suspect the NBA already knows this. The NBA also knows you can't pay them. The mere notion you could offer these players an amount of money and still plan to turn a profit is absurd. These players make more money by being selected to an All-Star game in current and future NBA contracts than you could ever offer the winning team of an All-Star game. I mean, think about the players that are on there just yearly. I mean, LeBron James every year. What amount of money are you going to offer a LeBron James? Or even go a little bit less. Kyrie Irving. What money are you going to offer Kyrie Irving? Steph Curry. These are absurd numbers we're talking about. And the NBA's current objective is to turn a profit, and just doesn't make any sense there. We already talked about that. The answers are all wrong because the questions the public has been asking are wrong. The question shouldn't be, how do we get the players to play hard in a clearly meaningless game? The real question is, how do we make the All-Star weekend interesting to fans? Bottom line is, the NBA All-Star Weekend is there to turn a profit. The only two events that caught my interest going into the weekend was Mac McClung, who I've seen doing crazy dunks since his junior year at Gate City. The biggest draw, though, for me, without a doubt, was Sabrina Ionescu versus Steph Curry in the three-point competition. Took no creativity. They didn't go remake the wheel with a three-point show between two. It was the exact same three-point competition that has been going on forever. The only twist is they added the best shooter from the WNBA and the best shooter from the NBA. That's all that happened. It was exciting. It was close. And it was validating. Curry showed why he's the best shooter in the world, capable of carrying an event like that himself. Sabrina tied all the other NBA players that night for the second highest score in the three-point shooting contest at 26. Believe she only got one shot at that as well. That should be counted. In fact, I really badly at the end of that wanted them to go again. You know, I didn't take arm exhaustion into it. I was like, can we give an hour? Can we rub the arms and throw them both back out there? Because it was so much fun to watch. And of course, Mac McClung and Sabrina Ionescu brought my interest back to the All-Star Weekend. Neither play in the NBA.
That's a really good point. I didn't even think about that, about how neither of them play in the NBA. The dunk contest really, I'm not gonna lie, it wasn't very interesting to me. But that Sabrina Curry 3-point shootout, that was my main event. That was what I was looking forward to. And let me tell you, as you mentioned, it lived up to the hype. It was so much fun to watch.
I'm going to get a little bit off topic by arguing that dunk contest take a little bit, just a little bit, not really arguing the same point here, but then we're going to get right back on track here. Do you think that dunk contest would have been as good with really any other player other than Mac McClung, who's currently not in the NBA, in the dunk contest?
I don't know. The only, there's the debate between our in-game dunkers as good as like creative dunkers. Mac McClung is obviously a creative dunker. And I don't watch the G League, so I don't know how he's doing. If he's a good in-game dunker, I'm assuming he is. But I'm thinking, if you can get these guys like John Morant, who is a high flyer, I know he's injured, so that wouldn't have really worked for this. But if you can get those high flyers, I think it would have been a little more interesting. Just because you have like those household names, I felt like I didn't really have a stake in this. I didn't really care who won. But if you get a star on, if I were a Celtics fan, I would have wanted Jaylen Brown to win. But yeah,
Zach LaVine. Zach LaVine is in place of Mac McClung. Is that as interesting to you? Because he's done dunk contests, and I didn't find them near as interesting. I think you're just a little bit of disrespect to Mac McClung's dunking ability because, like I said, been throwing it down forever now. I've been watching his dunks in his junior year of high school.
His YouTube highlights of his dunk mix since high school is absolutely phenomenal.
That's what the people want to see, and that's why the All-Star game has got to go. The players make too much, and there's little leverage for the NBA to use to make them play harder. The NBA should consider a weekend of entertainment that includes competitions between the NBA and the WNBA, the G League, and all the other ballers. These competitions have no need to stay the same year in and year out. And this plan actually fits the NBA because of the NBA's domination of social media. Why is this a great idea? Because, simply put, the NBA can go get a bunch of different ideas of all kinds of different competitions between, Sabrina Ionescu. The big next one's going to be Caitlin Clark, who we talked about earlier, and a bunch of these women basketball players, these WNBA players. And then you're going to get some G League, and there are some more dunkers like Mac McClung in the G League who are just, maybe the full game isn't NBA level, but the dunking is top tier. It's elite. I think you bring some of those players in. Then you got to talk about, maybe there's some interesting stuff with some street ballers, some professional street ballers, or, go get some players from Spain that are playing really well. There's just so many options here for the NBA that I feel like they limit themselves by putting it into a game that they know that these players are just never going to put a lot of effort in. What are your thoughts on that, Jake?
Well, one thing about the competitiveness of the game, I don't know how. I mean, I thought of earlier USA versus World. That could make them. There's some pride there. Could make them play harder. But one of the things I'm thinking of is, what if they go the opposite route? What if instead of trying to make this a competitive game, what if they just make it a more fun game? This is the first year, I believe, where they had that LED court. So why don't they use that to their advantage? Add a moving dots on the court, and have Curry pull up from, I don't know, half court. He pulls up on a moving dot. That's 5 points for the West. Just something to make it a little more creative. Something to make it a little more fun without upping the competition, because these guys don't want to compete at the highest level for the All-Star game.
Yeah, some different ideas there. So Jake's saying, make it a little bit more fun. I enjoy that aspect for the younger fan base, but I just don't know if you're going to get any of maybe the everyday watchers and the adults in the room on that too much. Now, I want to clarify my take a little bit before we move on to the NFL draft and the top 5 quarterbacks that we believe will be taken off the board. But I just want to clarify my take here. I think this is such a valuable suggestion for the NBA because their social media dominance is far beyond any other league. We don't see the MLS or NFL even putting up highlight videos that get as much watch around the world and just in the country as the NBA. I think it would be spectacular if they were able to create a list of these every year and have fans vote almost the same way they do in all-star voting on which ones they'd want to see the most, right?
That's a good idea.
That would be spectacular because then you don't have to worry so much about flops, and it invests the fan base that you're hoping will watch. I think that's just a top-tier idea, but I also think that your idea alludes a little bit more to a younger fan base and could maybe open up new avenues for what basketball can be as far as fun and not so much trying to make them compete. Because simply year in and year out, they don't. Now, I only had one more takeaway from the All-Star weekend, but I'd be remiss without talking about it. I was watching the All-Star Celebrity Game, and I'm going to admit, I was knocking out some journalism homework. But my biggest takeaway from the game is that Rams rookie star receiver Puka Nacua is just an awesome human. I mean, great player, but even more fun when he was on the mic. I think a great ad, and players like that should be interested in doing the Celebrity All-Star Game. I think it's so cool to see these players go cross sports just for a fun, friendly game like a celebrity game. All right, that moves us into our very second topic of the afternoon, and it is the NFL draft, the top 5 quarterbacks. Simply put, we're going 5-1. We may have differences. In fact, Jake and I did not put our list together at any point here, so I'm going to go ahead and start off with our number 5 pick, J.J. McCarthy from Michigan. Now, why is he the 5th best quarterback in this draft? And he fights with Bo Nix for this spot, in my opinion here. I think that of the top 5, top 6 quarterbacks that we're going to talk about here, I just feel like J.J. McCarthy has the most unknown about the talent of all of them. I feel like he was asked to do the least, despite possibly being able to do more for Michigan because they had such an identity throughout the year with Blake Corum and running that football. So I feel like, there's a lot of talent there that maybe some coaches are going to be keyed in on a little bit more than others. Of course, John Harbaugh getting into the league as well over there in the Chargers, and he will have some things to say, I'm sure, about J.J. McCarthy and the leader that he is. It's going to be interesting, though, to see kind of who values Bo Nix or J.J. McCarthy, because those are the ones I feel are really competing in this year's draft. And both Bo Nix and J.J. McCarthy feel sort of like the same player as far as what they're able to do and not able to do. Both really feel like fits to the Broncos at 12, the Raiders at 13, the Dolphins at 21. If the Dolphins want to get crazy and get a little cheaper, their cap situation's one of the worst right now, and they're going to have to find some creative ways to alleviate pressure. And I think that maybe deciding that you don't want to pay Tua again and deciding to go with Bo Nix or J.J. McCarthy just might be that move. I don't think they'll get a choice of the two. I believe one of the two will be gone by 21, if not both of them. I think that if either of those two players, the Bo Nix or J.J. McCarthy, get into the second round of the draft, that's what makes them a steal for anybody who's looking for even just a solid trade piece, but also a good backup quarterback for just a year or two. I mean, that goes for the 20 to 32 part of the draft there if he gets back to the second half there. What are your thoughts on your 5th spot and then J.J. McCarthy?
Yeah, so I went the opposite route with you. I went for Bo Nix. He's dynamic with his run game. He has a great creation ability. He is 23 years old. I think that's on the older side of quarterbacks in this draft. I think could also be some concerns about the level of competition he played in the Pac-12. He started his career kind of wild, not super consistent. I know these all sound terrible, but right now I'm going to get the good stuff. But he has an ability. He started inconsistent, but then he got a lot more consistent. I think that shows his worth ethic, his ability to develop. And I think teams are going to really value that. And they'll be able to see his growth potential, as they already have seen his growth potential in college. So that's why I have him at number 5.
That's interesting. And I think the big separator for me, for the both of them, which might not be fair when we're talking about the NFL draft, but I am myself. So, I can't change what matters to me the most. Simply put, I feel like Bo Nix had the better team going up against Washington and Michael Penix and DeBoer, all that crew. I feel like Oregon was in a better place to win both of those games, and they weren't able to get it done. And I feel like up and down the roster, Oregon had the most talent. So it was hard for me to put him at top 5 when J.J. McCarthy has done nothing but succeed, and that shows maybe he could have been given a little bit longer of a leash as well. So when I break down the two, but the one difference between those two, and it might matter to a certain head coach, is that Bo Nix is a much bigger quarterback than J.J. McCarthy. All right, that moves us into number 4. A little bit of a disagreement there, but that possibly means we line up pretty similarly throughout. I have, who we just talked about last, Michael Penix Jr. from Washington. Now, To me, this is the top of the second tier of quarterbacks. Michael Penix Jr. is amazing, has some injury history, is a little bit slight. There's going to certainly be questions, but the upside is immeasurable. And what he was able to do at Washington and all the way to the finals, is incredible. It's a hard ask for any team in Washington, but they were able to get it done. I think that's a big deal. Beat Oregon twice in the same season. Both times, I do believe that Oregon was favored in those matchups. And I'll be honest, it's hard to find a little bit of a position for Michael Penix Jr. I looked hard, and I think that the perfect team for him falls at 8 with the Falcons, if the Falcons decide to stay at 8. And then the Vikings as well, who I'm not sure if they're going to re-sign Kirk yet, and I'm not sure how much money that is and how much money they have. Right now, Justin Jefferson is looking for a new contract and will be the highest paid receiver, probably by a healthy margin, I would imagine. And if the Vikings decide we're going to pay Justin Jefferson and we're going to get cheaper at the quarterback position, I feel like Michael Penix Jr. can do a lot of what the Vikings asked on day one. That's why I feel like he's a value starter for the Vikings. I don't believe that Michael Penix Jr. could fall out of the first round. I do believe that's kind of the cap for the first round is 4, and that's pretty crazy. That would be if a few different quarterbacks started sliding down draft boards. I think Michael Penix Jr. might be the 4th best quarterback, but might have the best year because he might just fall to a team that might be in the best position. So Michael Penix Jr. Now I'm hoping for a lot of success, a lot of injuries, a great comeback story in the college football world, and just ready to put his talents on to the next level and possibly can do it.
Yeah, I had him at 4 too. There were, like you mentioned, the injury concerns, 2 torn ACLs and some shoulder problems, which could be kind of a concern. He's a strong left-hand throwing arm, good field vision. He's a tough competitor, coming back from those injuries. And also, like you said, led Washington to to the national championship game. He did come up short, but his ability to lead his team must have earned him at least some respect, and that's why I have him at 4.
Yeah, and they weren't expected to be, well, probably in the college football playoffs because I talked about earlier, they were kind of expected to lose against Oregon in their conference final. But, of course, winning that game gets in there. And then not expected to win in the first round either, getting it done. And of course, had some help. It wasn't all Michael Penix Jr., but Michael Penix Jr. was the instrument that made the noise. And I think that's why Michael Penix Jr. deserves to be the 4th-ranked quarterback on this list. Moving into number 3, I have Jaden Daniels from LSU. We got a Heisman winner here. We have a few in this. We're going to talk about one at the number 1 spot. Jaden Daniels gives off, and it's not just because he went to LSU, but a little bit of Joe Burrow vibes. And what do I mean by that? Maybe not the game's the exact same, but both of them kind of struggle elsewhere, come into LSU and ball out. And while Jaden Daniels will not have the win-loss record that Joe Burrow did or the success on the field that Burrow did, it was a lot in the same way. And I'll be honest, Jaden Daniels was asked to carry a lot with a rough defense this year. He had some good help on the wide receivers, but who hasn't? We talked about Michael Penix, J.J. McCarthy, Bo Nix. All of them have special players at the wide receiver position. Jaden Daniels, he was the first to blemish Mizzou's record this year. And it was a close game, good game, but it was really the Jaden Daniels show in the 4th quarter that got that game into LSU's favor. And, we could talk about what it did to Mizzou. Of course, their only other loss being to Georgia that year. But, it was a tough loss. He makes all the throws, is a little slim, and hasn't had a long rap sheet of success. But I think this will be the first quarterback that'll be off the board that should be valued more on fit rather than best quarterback available. When I look at this, I think 1 and 2, you go off and you take them immediately. And then when you look at Jaden Daniels and where his skills line up, can you pair him with a great team? Likely, we're going to see him at number 3 at the Patriots. That's just how the quarterbacks work in the NFL draft nowadays. You have to get the quarterback right, and I don't believe Drake May will fall to 2 or fall past 2, and I don't believe Caleb Williams will fall past that number 1 spot there. That means it's going to be interesting to see how Jaden Daniels does, likely as a Patriot.
Yeah, he's my number 3 as well. His draft stock rose just immensely after this year's performance. You mentioned the Heisman. He also won the Manning Award, the Golden Arm Award. He was a college a player of the year. In addition to his arm, he could run. He threw 40 touchdowns, but he also scored 10 rushing touchdowns. He's a dual threat quarterback, and I think teams will definitely value his potential.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, though. The build doesn't quite say NFL, and I think that's the question there. Because he can definitely run. And I've heard some people say he's as close to Lamar Jackson as you're going to find. And it's always funny. There's always it's as close to Patrick Mahomes or Lamar Jackson as you're going to find. Interesting how that always happens and always gets somebody a job pretty early in this draft. Now, I believe that we'll see Jaden Daniels in a Patriots uniform next year just because they have the 3rd draft. They need a quarterback. It makes too much sense, right? But the Patriots have had a long history of just being strange. And I believe their board could look different from 20 to 25 teams' boards in the NFL. So Jaden Daniels does have a chance to fall here. I do think this is the first quarterback that could take a little bit of a drop because of just because the Patriots could look a little bit differently. Of course, Belichick's out. That could always be a thing. That moves us on into our number 2 quarterback of this year's draft. That's Drake May, North Carolina Tar Heels. I think what's most special about Drake May is that he really has no weakness, but he's big. He's really big. It's 6'4", 230. I mean, you're talking about a quarterback that would have went first in about any draft from the 60s on. And then just over the last few years, would anybody look at Caleb Williams and say, despite not being 6'4", 230, I'll take Caleb Williams. That's a very new trend. So even 10 years ago, I imagine teams are looking at Drake May as a better quarterback than Caleb Williams. But I think Drake May's going to the Commanders at number 2. I made that clear earlier. However, the Patriots, that's the fit that I see the best for Drake May. If that could ever work out any way, shape, or form, I just see Drake May as a Patriots quarterback. It's cold. He's throwing into the wind. He's got that kind of power. Jaden Daniels is a little bit slim and doesn't really fit that Patriots vibe as much to me. But as I said, likely going to be locked in as the second quarterback taken because, simply put, there's really no huge weakness in Drake May's game.
Yeah, I have him at the second best as well. Like you mentioned, the size. In addition to size, he's mobile. He can kind of run it, and because of his size, he should be able to absorb hits pretty well. I think he has a fantastic upside, and so that's why I have him as second.
Yeah, and like I said, it just fits on the Patriots, but really Caleb Williams and Drake May, they fit on every team in the NFL that wants a quarterback, really, because they're just so special. They have all the tools to make into a great NFL quarterback. That's not to say that we'll be great NFL quarterbacks. There's so much more that goes into that. Coordinators, coaches, who you have around these players, their mental state, and I think that's a big deal going into these final weeks here. That's what's going to be analyzed the most in the public. Last year, you think about Stroud versus Bryce Young and the Wonderlic score and how much that meant. And it turns out it doesn't mean anything because I have listened to several videos of CJ Stroud breaking down football. And let me tell you, you need a PhD to even sit in on that. So I certainly think that way about Drake May. And then moving into our number 1 player, no doubt, it's on everybody's board. It's Caleb Williams.
Yep. And
Caleb Williams out of USC, our other Heisman winner, that was not last year, but the year before. He really is the Mahomes comparison so far. And we've heard that for about 2 years now. Supposed to have all the tools needed, speed, accuracy, power, leverage. All of this is important. All of this is supposedly in the package here. Now, the record this year at USC was not special. I don't know what you would attribute that to, Jake, but when I look at it, it had a lot to do with the defense, but I do believe Caleb Williams could have been better in a few spots. It's hard to nitpick, though, when your team is forced to score 40 and 50 points to win a game night in and night out.
Yeah, it is hard to nitpick, but he was able to get it done. He for the most part, I mean, he was absolutely fantastic this season, and definitely deserving of the number 1 spot.
Yeah, and I think he likely goes to Chicago, and I think that Chicago moves on from Justin Fields. That'll be very interesting to see where he gets his second shot. Yet, this is also a very interesting player because I think he fits best on Washington. I don't know how you feel about that, but the pairing again with the offense, the newly hired offensive coordinator in Washington, the Commanders, it just makes too much sense that would be the angle the Commanders are trying to take. You're just talking about now, how could the Commanders ever fleece that pick from Chicago without just this massive pick, haul that would just set your franchise back if Caleb Williams just happened to not be the player of the franchise. It's an interesting take. I'm asking you, Jake, is there any world where you see Caleb Williams not going first in this draft?
No. I think he just has too much upside. You mentioned that comparison to Patrick Mahomes. How can you not want to take a guy that's consistently compared to Patrick Mahomes? I definitely see him going number one, and for good reason.
In certain years, I could see kind of the layout of the draft dictating that he might not, just because, hey, maybe you kind of work out a gentleman's trade and he goes to 2 and you pick your best player. There's some amazing talent. Marvin Harrison Jr. you pick him, you've got a great player for 10, 15 years if he's healthy. Joe Alt, I think the same way. And Brock Bowers, I believe most people would say the same thing. But Caleb Williams with this year, with the quarterbacks, the trade value of Caleb Williams, knowing that the Patriots and the Washington Commanders both need quarterbacks, is astronomical. And I don't think that any team's going to get over that asking hump. If it comes down to time and the Commanders have not worked out a deal, Chicago has not worked out a deal, but they're set on keeping Justin Fields, who has said that he did not unfollow all of Chicago Bears stuff because he doesn't like them or thinks he's leaving. It's because he's tired of seeing football stuff, which, okay. Take that at face value. But we'll just go ahead and say, going into this draft here, I think it's got to be Caleb Williams because the price for it to be not Caleb Williams is just way too high. All right, and that sends us into our very first break. Thank you so much to listening to the Blake and Jake Show on KCOU 88.1 FM. Hello and welcome back into the Blake and Jake Show on KCOU 88.1 FM. And this is our very last segment of the day, so I'll go ahead and introduce it to you. It's UFC Fight Night Moreno versus Royval 2. This is an exciting rematch after injuries plagued both the main event and the People's main event in their very first matchups. These are both rematches, and both are fireworks. Both of these needed to be remade because both of these fights are special. Now, we're going to go ahead and start with one fight that is maybe not in that main event, not even in the main card, but it catches my eye, and I think it sets the tone for the night, the UFC Fight Night. I think it sets the tone here, and it's Claudio Puelles versus Fares Ziam. Now, this shadows a bit of the People's main event when we see Yair Rodriguez versus Ortega later on in style. Claudio Puelles is world-class jiu-jitsu with, so many rolls and funky looks that Fares Ziam, who is a kickboxer, might just struggle tonight. Has struggled to defend submissions early in his career, but his last submission came to Terrence McKinney, who I feel is more of a pressure fighter. It wasn't a let me get you down on the ground and show you I'm better in every position. It was like, I'm going to hit you real hard, then I'm going to take you down real fast, and I'm going to be all over you. So I don't feel like this is exactly that same matchup as Terrence McKinney, which means Fares Ziam has not actually been submitted inside the UFC other than that by kind of a fighter that'll get down and beat him position by position. That's why I think Ziam has a little bit of a chance here. I expect Ziam to dominate on the feet and be smart enough not to follow Puelles to the floor. However, Puelles has put together long win streaks because he forces these opponents to the floor with them, or he forces like kickboxers like Ziam to kind of fight timid. I think this best win would be Ziam's when he fought Jamie Malarkey, and even in his last matchup winning against Jai Herbert. Both of those offered very interesting matchups. Now, Malarkey is just a hard hitter, scrapper. You're going to get in there, you're going to take some hits. But Jai Herbert is extremely long, offers a unique fight to anybody that he's in there with. And Ziem was able to prove that he could kind of get in and have success. I think that Ziem is smart enough here to get the win because Claudio Puelles is going to have to get this fight to the floor. If it goes to the floor, though, it's just going to be well said that Ziem is not on the level of Puelles, and Puelles will put on a masterclass. So both have something to watch out for there. Jake, do you have any opinions on that fight? If you could pick a fighter to win that fight, which one do you think wins it?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Ziem. As long as he can, like you said, stay off the floor because Puelles is a much better grappler. Ziem has higher strikes landed, like, per minute. So I think if he can keep it up and off the floor, then he's got a pretty good chance.
You definitely have a point there. And I think that is like the fight to set off this entire card. When we break down the next fight, it's going to be Raul Rosas Jr. versus Ricky Tercios. Now, one of the themes of this fight night is clearly jiu-jitsu because Raul Rosas Jr. is the youngest UFC fighter. In fact, he fought on the Dana White Contender Series before he was 18. He's a jiu-jitsu, once again, world class. And he's fighting Ricky Tercios, who's a special guy as well. Ricky Tercios is full throttle, has like a fantastic gas tank, and shows durability in spades. He doesn't always fight with a grounded stance. That's what I see when I watch him fight. I don't think he's a exceptional, powerful fighter for the bantamweight division, but I think it would benefit him a lot to kind of ground his strikes a little bit more, and I think that's why this matchup was made. I don't think the UFC wants Raul Rosas to lose. I think this is a fight set up for him to win. He's a young jiu-jitsu phenom. He won the Contender Series. He's now 3-1 already in just his first year. He's 19 now, but I mean, think about that. And he was 18 years old. He went to the top fighting organization, and he went 3-1 in just his first year. Spectacular. I think that this is kind of built for Rosas to continue building that hype train. Ricky Tercios is not going to give Rosas a free position, but I don't feel like Ricky Tercios has the power to put Rosas out, and I don't feel like he's going to be able to choke Rosas out or get an armbar. I don't think there's a submission in this fight for Ricky Tercios. So I think the question is, how does Ricky Tercios win?
I think he has the ability to win by knockout. Honestly, he's like you said, he's obviously young, but he is raw talent. I really do. I think that with the power that he has, at least in this fight, he has the opportunity to knock it out, and it also gets me excited for his future. If he can be able to build up that strength, he'll be a fantastic fighter in the future.
Certainly. But when I look at Ricky Tercios, I see really only one avenue of success in this fight. I don't think it belongs on the floor. It does belong on the feet, but I believe it belongs on the feet in the second and the third round. I think that's when Ricky Tercios can keep that gas pedal, keep it down, and maybe start to tire out Rosas a little bit. If Rosas is unsuccessful in that first round, maybe a little bit in that second round, is still not finding the success that he wants, I think that Ricky Tercios might just start to, see some avenues of victory late into that second round and into that third round as well. That moves us into our third fight, and this is a fun one as well. This one is Daniel Zellhuber, I always mess that up, versus Francisco Prado is the fight. But Zellhuber is, if you don't know, now you know. And I know that's like a popular Dana White thing, but he's probably one of those top young prospects that just doesn't get enough buzz. He's huge. 6'1", 77-inch reach. I mean, Francisco Prado, who's a very special talent in his own right, is 5'10" with a 69-inch reach. Now, this is in the lightweight division. 77-inch reach in the lightweight division. It's absolutely insane. It gives Zellhuber such an advantage in these fights where he succeeds already the most. When he's striking, it's dangerous. His hands come around like whips, and a lot of these fighters just don't seem to get a good timing and a good space on Daniel Zellhuber. And I think this could be a pretty rough fight for Prado. What are your thoughts on this off the gate?
Yeah, I like you mentioned, he has tons great hand speed. I feel like that Zellhuber likes to work at a distance, probably because of that length. And he's able to keep opponents away from him in that regard. But I think that Prado is gonna probably try to pressure Zellhuber against the fence, maybe make him work to get a little bit closer. But overall, I have Zellhuber winning, and I think this fight will probably go the distance. But I think that if Zellhuber is able to take control of this fight early, then it'll be a good one for him.
On the feet is where Zellhuber does his work, having weapons from both stances. He really likes to switch those stances and throw everything. He's not a slouch on the floor either, submitting Christian Giagos in his last fight. But Prado is an absolute stud, and has proved, though, on the outside of the UFC and on the inside. He actually was Samurai House belt. He won the belt, and then he defended it 3 times heading into the UFC. Had a really tough debut versus Jamie Mullarkey, who we talked about earlier. Fares Ziem fighting and winning against Jamie Mullarkey, but just a tough fight for anybody, let alone a debut in the UFC. Then, another tough ass. He's asked to fight Otman Azaitar in his sophomore performance, and I expected that to be another rough test for Prado, and I didn't expect him to figure it out so soon, but just in one round was able to get it done. In this fight, this is going to be just I see this as a decision, because both of these guys on the feet are spectacular, and I don't think either of them are going to get ahead on the ground either. I feel like Prado might have an advantage on the ground a little bit, but when you talk about Zellhuber's length, he's going to be able to negate a lot, going to be able to stuff a lot of takedowns. I don't know if that's Prado's best chance of winning in this fight. So when I look at it too, I see Zellhuber winning, but I do think Prado has some possibilities for some holes, some openings on the feet, especially when Zellhuber switches stances. Can he get a shot in during a stance switch? That's what this fight's going to be about. It's going to be about footwork, it's going to be about spacing, and it's going to be about Prado getting inside and ruining both of those for Zellhuber. All right, and now to the people's main event, and I'll be excited. This is one I've had circled on the calendar because it's name value, it's talent on every level, and it's just going to be an absolute chaos fight. It's Yair Rodriguez versus Brian Ortega. This echoes the match between Poyez and Ziem that we discussed earlier. Brian Ortega has few equals in the UFC featherweight division when it comes to jiu-jitsu, yet I don't think his hand speed is very good, and his technical skills on the feet can definitely be taken advantage of. And when you look over Yair Rodriguez, a scary fighter, especially if you don't think that your stand-up game can compare, because Yair Rodriguez is throwing kicks from everywhere. There is no fighter that is going to feel comfortable in front of Yair, and that goes doubly so for Brian Ortega. I see this as a rough fight. I don't know. How do you see this fight, Jake?
Yeah, I feel like Rodriguez has a good amount of momentum coming in this fight. He has an unorthodox strike, lots of athleticism. Ortega, on the other hand, hungry for redemption against Rodriguez after getting controversially knocked out a while ago. I do have a question for you, though. Ortega hasn't fought since 2022. When they had their last fight, what kind of fighter do you think we're going to get from Ortega? You think he's coming out of the gate strong, or what do you think is going to happen?
I see Ortega as a very motivated human. Now, I want to just preface this. That last loss versus Yair Rodriguez was due to a dislocated shoulder. He was attempting to fight with it. It was just not going to work for a 5-round fight. And, so this is a very necessary rematch, number one. Number two, Ortega's been through a lot. I know that he was dating Vanessa Cortez, who is also a UFC fighter right now on a streak herself. They broke up. It's been a rough time for Ortega, but like I said, I think that Ortega is a very motivated human. I think he's as long as he's pointed in the right direction, I think you're going to get a good Brian Ortega in this matchup. I just don't think the style fits Ortega's matchup. I don't think this is a good matchup for Ortega, just looking at what Yair Rodriguez offers other fighters as far as dangers. Yair Rodriguez is likely going to find a lot of success in the stand-up, keeping Ortega uncomfortable and on the outside with like a bunch of kicks and combinations. I expect Rodriguez to avoid the ground game of Ortega entirely. If Ortega does get Rodriguez to the ground, I still don't feel like the gap between the two is as cavernous as Yair is on the feet. I do feel like Rodriguez is much better than Ortega on the feet than Ortega is with Rodriguez on the ground. So I do think that Yair comes out of that matchup, and that brings us into the main event. And I got to tell you, this is a special main event for me because Brandon Moreno is possibly one of my favorite fighters. But if there is a guy that you've ever wanted to kind of get over the hump, it's Brandon Royval, and it is the matchup of the Brandons. And it is also matchup number 2. And in this matchup, Royval was the one with the injury. Early in the matchup, it was just clear Royval was not going to continue. So this matchup was just as needed in order to settle who is the better fighter here. And it comes at a pretty good time when both are coming off a loss to Alexander Pantoja. I see Brandon Royval being the aggressor in this matchup. The last fight, it ended on the ground scramble, dislocates his shoulder. But Royval, he's had plenty of time to grow and watch and everything. I feel like this fight is going to see the best version of both of these fighters. Brandon Moreno fights with fewer mistakes and more patience. But both, like I said, both are coming off that loss. Maybe it's time for one of them to switch it up. Do you think one comes out with a different style to win this matchup, Jake? Or do you think that this is just going to be, hey, stick to your guns and see who comes out at top?
No, I think this is definitely a stick to your guns type of thing. You know, they had that other their previous matchup. You mentioned the injury. I think they want to, do what they do best. I don't think they want to do something new. I think they're staying with what they know best.
Yeah, I struggle to pick in this matchup because I do think that Moreno's going to offer less holes than Brandon Royval in this fight. And Moreno's a sizable betting favorite in this matchup. It's getting pretty close to minus 300. I don't see that, though. Can I be honest? And this is a tough fight for me to decide as a fan because Brandon Moreno is a fan favorite of mine. But if I saw this fight 10 times, I would expect both to win 5. That's how close I see this. So when I saw that there was a minus 300 line on Brandon Moreno, it did catch me a little off guard. That does it for the 6th episode of The Blake and Jake Show on KCOU 88.1 FM. I invite listeners to be our very first followers on our newly created Instagram. That's The Blake and Jake Show, no spaces. If you've only caught part of the show, but not the whole show, or maybe you want to hear the whole show over again, check us out on Spotify and YouTube at The Blake and Jake Show. It's been an absolute pleasure, and we hope to see you next week for another episode of The Blake and Jake Show, Wednesdays at 2 p.m. on KCOU 88.1 FM. Thank you so much for listening.